The morning sun rose over Davis, Monthan Air Force Base with a crisp metallic chill, its rays glinting off the rows of aircraft parked neatly in the hangar. Admiral Jack Harlow walked briskly along the tarmac, his polished boots striking the concrete with authority. He had the kind of presence that demanded attention, not through loudness but through the quiet intensity of his gaze. Today, however, his mind was restless. Delays in maintenance had thrown off the schedule, and frustration simmered beneath his usually composed exterior. Every technician seemed to move too slowly, every procedure took longer than it should. Near the edge of the hangar, quietly mopping the floor beneath a parked A-10 Thunderbolt II, was Eli Turner. Eli was an unassuming man in his late 50s, with streaks of gray in his hair and calloused hands that hinted at a life of hard work. To most people on the base, he was invisible, a janitor who kept the hangar clean, never spoke unless spoken to, and avoided attention at all costs. Today, however, his eyes flicked up briefly at the sound of the Admiral's boots, registering something that no one else might have noticed. A subtle tension, a storm of irritation barely contained behind the Admiral's composed exterior. Harlow's eyes scanned the hangar with a critical precision honed over decades. He muttered to himself, the words sharp with frustration. Another delay, another day wasted. How hard is it to get these systems operational? He shook his head, pausing near a group of young technicians who were huddled over the undercarriage of another A-10, troubleshooting a hydraulic issue. The men looked up, sensing his presence, their conversation dying instantly under the weight of his gaze. As he strode past Eli, mopping in silence, the Admiral's irritation took a sudden, sardonic turn. He leaned down slightly and said, loud enough for a few nearby crew members to hear, "Hey, Turner, if you know so much about these birds, why don't you just fly the A-10 for us?" The hangar froze for a fraction of a second. A chuckle passed through a few of the technicians, though it was tentative, unsure if they should laugh at the Admiral's joke. Eli didn't respond. He only smiled faintly, a tiny curl of lips that suggested amusement or perhaps quiet understanding. It was impossible to tell. His hands continued their rhythmical mopping, his eyes steady but inscrutable. Most people would have dismissed the interaction immediately, treating it as nothing more than another one of Harlow's habitual quips. Yet something about the way Eli carried himself, the calm confidence beneath the stillness, the knowledge in his eyes, the almost imperceptible shift in posture, made the Admiral pause, almost imperceptibly. For a fleeting moment, the joke seemed heavier than he intended. Harlow shook his head and continued walking, muttering under his breath. Ridiculous, a janitor, flying an A-10. But even as he said it, he couldn't erase the image of Eli's quiet smile from his mind. It was unnerving, the way the man seemed to hold a secret the rest of the base didn't even suspect existed. Later that morning, Harlow found himself returning to the hangar, ostensibly to inspect a newly serviced aircraft. His mind, however, wandered. He watched Eli quietly sweeping debris from under the aircraft, the mop swaying with practiced precision. There was a rhythm to his movements, almost meditative and yet efficient, like a man accustomed to routine but deeply aware of everything around him. He didn't just clean, he observed. Every bolt, every line of hydraulic tubing, every crack in the concrete floor was catalogued in the quiet recesses of his mind. Some of the young technicians whispered among themselves, curious about the unassuming janitor who seemed to notice everything. "Did you see him check the hydraulic levels yesterday?" one whispered. "I swear he's got eyes everywhere," another replied. But even among their curiosity there was uncertainty. Was it just attentiveness or something more? By mid-morning, Harlow's irritation had begun to merge with curiosity. During a coffee break, he watched Eli sitting alone, reading a maintenance manual. He seemed completely absorbed, turning pages with deliberate care, eyes scanning diagrams and technical specifications with an intensity that suggested familiarity. The Admiral's interest deepened. Something wasn't adding up. A janitor shouldn't know this much about aircraft systems, especially the A-10. He decided to check personnel records. The base computer spit out Eli Turner's file. 2 years of employment, spotless record, excellent references, no prior aviation experience listed. It was unremarkable, almost boring, yet every technician he spoke to mentioned Eli's knowledge, always adding, almost apologetically, "He knows his stuff, but he's just the janitor." That phrase gnawed at Harlow. Just the janitor. It didn't fit. Something about Eli was exceptional, and the Admiral felt the prickling anticipation of a mystery unfolding in real time. By lunch, the hangar buzzed with the usual chatter, but Harlow couldn't focus on it. He watched Eli quietly making notes on a pad, diagrams of aircraft systems, lines connecting hydraulic circuits, notes on electrical failures. The man was meticulous, precise, and for some reason utterly silent about it. Harlow approached cautiously, clearing his throat. "Turner," he said, trying to sound casual, though the curiosity in his voice betrayed him. "You seem interested in all this." Eli looked up, eyes steady, unreadable. "I like to know what's going on around me, sir," he replied simply, his voice calm, devoid of arrogance. Harlow felt a chill run down his spine. There was more here than met the eye. The way Eli spoke, the way he held himself, suggested knowledge gained from experience, not observation. The Admiral tried to suppress the thought. It was absurd, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. That afternoon, Harlow returned to the hangar again, this time lingering near the A-10s, ostensibly inspecting an aircraft but really watching Eli. The janitor moved with quiet efficiency, yet every motion, every glance, every slight tilt of his head suggested a man who knew exactly what he was dealing with. Crew members passed by, oblivious to the small drama unfolding in the Admiral's mind. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the hangar floor, Harlow realized the day had changed for him. What began as a joke, the passing comment about a janitor flying an A-10, had planted a question that would not leave him alone. Who was Eli Turner, really? What was he capable of? And why did the simple act of watching him feel like standing on the edge of a secret that was about to be revealed? Harlow knew, deep down, that the answer would not be ordinary. And he also knew, with a subtle but undeniable certainty, that the joke he had made earlier, offhand, careless, meant to amuse, might someday be proven far more literal than anyone could imagine. By the end of Part 1, the hangar felt charged with anticipation. Crew members were oblivious. The A-10s sat silently in their parking spots, and the janitor, unseen, unassuming, unheralded, continued his quiet work. But for Admiral Harlow, a storm of curiosity, suspicion, and awe had begun, a storm that would change everything he thought he knew about this ordinary man. The next morning, the hangar was alive with the usual clamor, the hum of engines starting, footsteps echoing against concrete, the distant roar of aircraft being towed. Yet amidst the noise, Eli Turner moved like a shadow, silent and purposeful, his mop gliding across the floor as if tracing invisible lines of energy that only he could perceive. The previous day's events, the Admiral's offhand comment about flying the A-10, lingered in the air like a whisper no one else could hear. For most, it was a joke. For Harlow, it was a puzzle he could not ignore. Curiosity gnawed at him throughout the morning. He found himself wandering closer to Eli under the guise of inspection, noting the way the janitor's eyes tracked every movement in the hangar. When a young technician fumbled with a panel on a parked A-10, Eli subtly gestured, correcting the alignment with a flick of his hand, precise and confident, yet not intrusive. Harlow's brow furrowed. Who was this man, really? He had seen plenty of skilled personnel in his decades of service, but Eli's expertise, silent, unassuming, near magical, was different. During a mid-morning break, Harlow returned to his office, unable to resist the temptation to dig deeper. He sat at his desk, typing Eli Turner into the personnel database. The response was almost anticlimactic. A standard record with 2 years of employment as a janitor, spotless conduct, excellent references, no military history, no prior experience listed. On paper, Eli was unremarkable, but Harlow knew better. The man's knowledge, his precise movements, the subtle authority in his eyes, they spoke of decades of experience hidden beneath a mundane exterior. Harlow decided to question some of the senior technicians. One by one, he asked casually, almost conversationally, about Eli Turner. The answers were inconsistent but telling. "He's good at noticing things most of us miss," one said. "I swear he knows more about the aircraft than some of the junior pilots," whispered another. A third shook his head. "He doesn't talk about it, just watches, listens, and fixes things quietly. I think he might have flown before, but nobody knows." Each statement left Harlow more unsettled. It was not only what Eli knew, but the way he carried himself. There was a confidence that did not demand recognition, a competence so absolute that it bordered on invisible authority. Harlow had seen many pilots and technicians who were skilled, yes, but none had the silent, almost mystical presence of Eli Turner. He was beginning to feel that the man's ordinary exterior was a deliberate mask, hiding something that most would find extraordinary. Determined to uncover the truth, Harlow decided to speak with Eli directly. At lunchtime, he found the janitor seated alone, meticulously reading a thick maintenance manual on the floor near a row of parked A-10s. Eli's eyes scanned every page with intensity, occasionally jotting down notes on scraps of paper. Harlow approached quietly, clearing his throat softly. "Turner," he began, trying to sound casual, "I noticed you've been spending quite a lot of time on these manuals." Eli looked up slowly, his gaze steady, unflinching. "I like to understand how things work, sir," he replied, his voice calm, devoid of any arrogance. "It helps me do my job better." Harlow studied him, nodding the quiet authority behind the words. "Your job?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "You mean cleaning floors?" Eli smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, then looked back at his notes. "I clean floors, sir, but I like to know the machines around me. Keeps me sharp." The Admiral felt a chill run down his spine. Something about the simplicity of Eli's words made them seem like a veil over something much larger. He tried again. "You've been watching, studying, correcting a lot. How long have you been interested in aircraft?" Eli hesitated just a fraction, long enough to notice. "A long time, longer than most people would guess. I just prefer to keep it quiet." Harlow leaned back, realizing the man in front of him was hiding something. Not out of fear, not out of shame, but out of choice. There was pride here, but it was different from the pride of a soldier showing medals. This was quiet mastery, concealed intentionally. The Admiral's mind raced. What had caused this man to step away from flying? Why had he chosen invisibility over recognition? Determined to get answers, Harlow made a decision. After lunch, he asked Eli to join him in the administrative office under the pretense of reviewing routine protocols. Eli agreed silently, following with a calm gait, hands clasped behind his back. Once inside, Harlow closed the door gently, and the silence between them was thick with unspoken questions. "Turner," Harlow began, trying again to mask curiosity with authority, "I need to ask you something serious. Did you ever fly an A-10? For a moment, Eli said nothing. The room felt smaller, the noise of the hangar muted to a distant hum. Finally, he spoke, voice steady but quiet. "Yes, sir. A long time ago, Air National Guard, 14 years. Harlow's breath caught. 14 years. That explained everything, the knowledge, the precision, the silent confidence. Why aren't you flying now? Why hide?" he asked, trying to reconcile the ordinary janitor with the extraordinary man sitting before him. Eli looked down, tracing a line on the floor with his toe. "I lost someone, a close friend, a wingman. After that, I didn't want to be around the flying world anymore. Too many memories, too many regrets." The Admiral's stern exterior softened, though only slightly. He understood loss, though perhaps not in the same intimate way. "You could have continued, you were skilled enough, decorated even. Why disappear completely?" "I wanted to see life differently," Eli said simply. "Quiet, simple. I wanted to be invisible. It's easier that way. People judge less when they think you're nothing." Harlow nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the confession. Here was a man who had once commanded planes, once been at the height of skill and danger, now choosing anonymity over glory. Yet, even in obscurity, his abilities had not faded, they had only been concealed. And now, for reasons the Admiral couldn't yet predict, they would not stay hidden for long. The rest of the afternoon passed with Harlow observing Eli more closely than ever. Each movement, each glance, each careful step told a story he was only beginning to understand. Eli's attention to detail, his mastery of procedures, and the calm authority in his presence suggested that he was not just skilled, but extraordinary. Yet there was humility, restraint, and a quiet dignity that made him almost untouchable in the Admiral's mind. By evening, Harlow had made a mental decision. If the right situation arose, if circumstances demanded it, he would test Eli's abilities, not out of curiosity but necessity. And when that moment came, he knew deep down that Eli Turner was a man who could redefine everything they thought they knew about skill, courage, and expertise. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the hangar, Eli continued his work, unaware that his secret had been partially uncovered. Harlow watched him from across the hangar, thinking that some mysteries were dangerous to ignore, and some abilities were too rare to remain hidden forever. The stage was set unknowingly for an extraordinary event, one that would challenge rules, expectations, and perhaps even fate itself. The morning air at Davis, Munson Air Force Base, was unusually tense. Technicians bustled about, but a sense of unease hung over the hangar. Rumors had spread overnight of a malfunction in one of the A-10 Thunderbolts returning from a routine training mission. The landing gear had failed, fuel levels were critically low, and the only qualified instructor pilot was hospitalized with a sudden illness. Harlow had been notified immediately, but as he surveyed the hangar, he realized the severity of the situation. The emergency required immediate action, or the aircraft could be lost, possibly with catastrophic consequences. Admiral Harlow strode across the hangar, his face grim, every step precise and purposeful. The crew around him worked frantically, checking systems, adjusting hydraulics, and prepping backup planes. The tension was palpable. Orders were shouted, radios crackled, and yet, despite the chaos, a single figure moved calmly among the commotion. Eli Turner, the unassuming janitor, continued his meticulous routine, quietly ensuring the hangar was safe and operational. It was as if he existed in a separate world, untouched by the frantic energy around him. Harlow stopped mid-stride and looked at Eli. The thought flitted into his mind almost involuntarily. If anyone here could handle this, it would be him. He immediately dismissed it as absurd. A janitor, flying an A-10. Regulations and protocol forbade such a thing. Yet the previous day's discoveries, the quiet authority, the intimate knowledge of the aircraft, the uncanny skill made him pause. Harlow muttered under his breath, partly in jest and partly in disbelief. Unless Turner can fly it. The words seemed to hang in the air. Eli, who had been quietly organizing equipment, looked up. His eyes met Harlow's with steady calm. There was no hesitation, no doubt. "Sir, I can," he said softly. The hangar went silent for a heartbeat. Crew members froze mid-motion, unsure if they had heard correctly. Harlow's jaw tightened and his mind raced. Could this really be happening? The man had never been certified to fly on base since his hearing. Protocols would be in chaos, but the urgency of the moment left few alternatives. Technicians exchanged glances, whispers rippling through the hangar. "Did he just? I think he's serious." The word spread like wildfire. The janitor claimed he could fly an A-10. Harlow, trying to maintain composure, gestured for Eli to step aside. "Explain," he demanded. Eli approached, calm and deliberate. "I flew A-10s for 14 years in the Air National Guard, sir. I've handled every emergency this aircraft can throw at a pilot and then some." The words left Harlow stunned. Protocol, regulations, and all the rules he had followed for decades suddenly collided with the raw reality of necessity. He looked around the hangar. There was no time to wait for the replacement instructor, no one else qualified to take the plane and perform the emergency procedures. The aircraft could be lost in minutes. Every technician, pilot, and staff member turned their eyes toward him, waiting for a decision. Harlow swallowed hard. The responsibility pressed against him like a physical weight. Calling for Eli to pilot the aircraft could cost him his career, but refusing could cost lives. He remembered the calm precision, the quiet knowledge, the authority that had emanated from Eli even as a janitor. Something in the Admiral's instincts told him that this man could do the impossible. And in a situation like this, instincts were worth listening to. "Suit up," Harlow said finally, his voice measured but firm. There was no hesitation in Eli's response. Without a word, he walked toward the locker room, removed his janitor's uniform, and pulled on a flight suit. The transformation was subtle yet profound. The uniform fit perfectly, not as a costume but as if waiting for him all these years. Harlow watched with a mix of apprehension and awe. Crew members whispered and murmured, trying to process what was happening. Eli moved toward the A-10 with calm, precise steps. He paused to check instruments, running through a mental checklist, his eyes scanning every dial, switch, and control panel. The hangar seemed to hold its collective breath as the engines roared to life. Each sound resonated through the cavernous space, vibrating against concrete walls. Harlow couldn't help but feel a shiver down his spine. This was no ordinary janitor. This was a man who had lived in the skis, who had survived unimaginable emergencies, and now was stepping into history, one calculated motion at a time. As Eli taxied the aircraft toward the runway, Harlow's thoughts raced. He thought of the risks, the emergency situation, the broken protocol, the lives at stake. Yet he also thought of the unparalleled skill in front of him. Crew members followed silently, some gripping consoles, others staring in awe, unable to tear their eyes away. There was a strange, almost spiritual quality to the moment. Time seemed to slow, compressed into the measured rhythm of the roaring engines and Eli's precise movements. The tension escalated as the damaged A-10 approached the base. Fuel levels were dangerously low, hydraulics unstable, and communication had been sporadic. Every second mattered. Harlow watched from the control tower, jaw tight, eyes scanning instruments, radios, and the horizon. And then he saw it. Eli maneuvering his aircraft flawlessly, adjusting angles, throttles, and flaps with a calm authority that was almost surreal. It was as if he were not just flying the plane but dancing with it, anticipating every motion, every reaction. Pilots and technicians whispered among themselves, their disbelief palpable. "How? He's doing things even our instructors wouldn't attempt." Eli maintained composure, his eyes focused, hands steady. He relayed precise instructions over the radio, guiding the base crew in preparation for the damaged aircraft's landing. Every word, every motion exuded mastery. Harlow's skepticism had vanished, replaced by awe. This was a man who had lived in this world before, and even years away from active service. The skill had never left him. Minutes stretched into eternity as Eli positioned his A-10 in formation to assist the approaching aircraft. The emergency escalated. The damaged plane wobbled, threatening to spin out of control. Yet Eli remained calm, issuing instructions and maneuvering his own aircraft with effortless precision. Harlow felt a mixture of fear and admiration, knowing that this moment could define careers, lives, and legacies. The hangar and control tower were silent, witnesses to something that seemed almost impossible, yet undeniably real. By the end of the morning, it was clear that Eli Turner, the quiet janitor, was no ordinary man. He had stepped out of obscurity to perform a feat that few could imagine, guiding the emergency situation with unparalleled skill. The crisis had emerged, testing every instinct, protocol, and skill the base had to offer. And yet through it all, Eli had remained calm, precise, and focused, transforming the hangar from a place of chaos into a theater of controlled mastery. Harlow, still watching from above, realized that the joke he had made the previous week, about the janitor flying an A-10, was no longer a joke. It had become reality, and the man in question had not only met expectations but exceeded them in ways that defied belief. As the damaged aircraft approached its precarious landing, Harlow's respect for Eli shifted from curiosity to profound admiration. This man, hidden in plain sight, had proven that extraordinary skill could survive even years of obscurity, and that quiet heroes often went unnoticed until the moment the world demanded their presence. The seeds of awe, trust, and suspense were planted. Harlow understood now that Eli Turner's past, his skills, and his restraint had prepared him for this exact moment. The next steps would test him even further, but for now, the hangar had witnessed the first signs of something remarkable, a janitor poised to redefine everything they thought they knew about courage, skill, and human potential. The hangar was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of A-10 engines powering up and the occasional shout of a technician coordinating emergency procedures. Admiral Harlow stood near the edge of the control tower, watching Eli Turner move toward the aircraft with calm, deliberate steps. Each motion was precise, confident, and almost hypnotic. There was no hesitation in Eli's movements, only the steady rhythm of a man who had done this countless times before. Harlow's mind raced. He knew now that the emergency was beyond the skill of any ordinary crew. Even the most experienced young pilots could not have handled the situation with the level of calm authority Eli displayed. The janitor, this quiet, unassuming man, was about to become the center of the most critical operation the base had seen in years. Eli paused before the A-10, surveying the cockpit, the instruments, the panels, and the controls. His hands moved instinctively, almost as if the aircraft itself recognized him. He ran through a checklist in his mind, recalling procedures, emergency protocols, and contingencies with flawless precision. The crew watched, some leaning forward in disbelief, others whispering, unsure if they should intervene. No one had expected this level of expertise from someone who had been nothing more than a janitor on paper. Harlow called Eli over to a side console. "Turner," he said, voice low but urgent, "you need to tell me exactly what you can do. I have to know if this is even remotely possible." Eli nodded and began to speak, his voice calm but authoritative. "I was an A-10 pilot in the Air National Guard," Eli said. 14 years of flight experience. I've handled emergencies like this countless times. Landing gear failures, hydraulic malfunctions, engine issues. I've flown in combat and training alike. I know the risks, the maneuvers, and the protocols. If allowed, I can stabilize the situation and guide the damaged aircraft to a safe landing. Harlow's eyes widened. He had suspected Eli had experience, but he had never expected the full truth to emerge so quickly. "Why aren't you flying officially?" he asked, genuinely perplexed. Eli's gaze dropped slightly. "I left the service after a personal tragedy," he said softly. "I lost my closest friend in a combat accident. I couldn't continue flying after that. The memories, the guilt, I just wanted to disappear." His voice was steady, but a shadow passed across his face, a hint of pain and regret that seemed almost tangible. The Admiral felt a pang of empathy. He understood loss, though not in the same intimate way, and he saw in Eli a man who had chosen obscurity as a form of survival. "You could have come back," Harlow said, his voice measured. "You were skilled enough to continue, even excel. Why hide?" Eli looked up, meeting the Admiral's gaze. "I wanted to live quietly, sir. People don't judge you when they think you're ordinary. I wanted to be unnoticed, to keep my life simple." Harlow studied him. The revelation only deepened his respect. Here was a man who had been extraordinary and had willingly chosen to hide his talents, and now necessity had dragged him back into the world he had left behind. The crew members who had been watching from nearby whispered among themselves. "Did he really just say he's a pilot?" one asked. Another shook their head in disbelief. "I thought it was a joke. It turns out he's telling the truth." Harlow gestured for Eli to proceed. "Then do what you have to do," he said, voice firm but tinged with awe. "The situation is critical and you're our only option." Eli climbed into the cockpit with a quiet confidence that was almost regal. Every movement, strapping in, adjusting the seat, checking instruments, demonstrated mastery honed over years of experience. The engines roared to life, and the aircraft seemed to respond to Eli's presence with an almost sentient obedience. Harlow's heart pounded as he watched, realizing that the man who had once been invisible among them was now the linchpin of a life-or-death operation. The ground crew scrambled to assist, but even they were in awe. Young pilots stared, mouths slightly open, whispering in disbelief. "He handles it like he never left," one murmured. The hangar, normally a hub of organized chaos, seemed to hold its collective breath. The emergency had begun, but with Eli at the controls, there was an unexpected sense of calm. Harlow walked toward the hangar floor, unable to take his eyes off the janitor-turned-pilot. "You really think you can handle this?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Eli's eyes never wavered from the instruments. "I've done worse, sir," he said simply. "This is within my capability." The Admiral nodded slowly, feeling a mix of fear and admiration. He realized that the joke he had made weeks ago, telling the janitor to fly the A-10, was now terrifyingly literal. But unlike the jest, this was no longer hypothetical. The aircraft, the emergency, the lives at stake, all of it depended on the skill and composure of one man. Eli taxied the aircraft toward the runway with precision, moving through the steps as though every action had been rehearsed countless times in his mind. Harlow watched, heart pounding, as the janitor-turned-pilot performed each maneuver flawlessly. Crew members whispered, some holding their breath. The tension was palpable. As the damaged A-10 approached the base, Eli's focus sharpened. He adjusted flaps, checked throttle levels, and monitored the aircraft's trajectory with meticulous care. He issued calm, precise instructions to the ground crew, guiding them through repositioning other aircraft and clearing the runway. His presence brought order to the chaos. Even the Admiral felt his pulse slow slightly, reassured by the certainty in Eli's movements. For the first time, Harlow understood the depth of Eli's experience. This was not simply a man who had flown planes. This was a man who had lived and breathed aviation, whose instincts had been honed under pressure, and whose composure in life-threatening scenarios was unshakable. And yet, despite all of this, Eli remained humble, focused solely on the task at hand. The hangar and control tower were silent, bearing witness to something extraordinary. A janitor, quiet, unassuming, and overlooked, had revealed himself as a man of exceptional skill, courage, and knowledge. And while the emergency was far from over, the revelation of his past and capabilities had already begun to shift perceptions, forcing everyone to reconsider what they thought they knew about heroism, experience, and the hidden talents of those around them. Eli Turner approached the A-10 with calm determination, the roar of nearby engines echoing off the hangar walls. Crew members stepped aside instinctively, giving him space as he climbed into the cockpit. For a man who had spent years hiding in plain sight, this was a return to a world he had once known intimately, a world of precision, risk, and controlled chaos. As he strapped himself into the seat, adjusting the harness with practiced ease, the entire hangar seemed to pause, aware that something extraordinary was unfolding. The cockpit of the A-10 was a maze of dials, switches, levers, and panels. To the untrained eye, it was intimidating, almost alien. But to Eli, it was familiar territory. His hands glided over the controls with confidence, checking each gauge, adjusting each setting, moving with the instinct of someone who had spent thousands of hours in the seat. Each action was deliberate, measured, and precise, a testament to years of experience and intimate knowledge of the aircraft. Admiral Harlow watched from the control tower, his heart pounding. The previous day's joke, that the janitor could fly, had never seemed so absurd and yet so chillingly possible. He observed Eli's movements, the way his eyes scanned instruments, the subtle adjustments of his hands and feet. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. Every motion was confident, fluid, almost graceful. Harlow felt a mixture of fear and awe. If Eli failed, the consequences would be dire. If he succeeded, it would be nothing short of miraculous. The ground crew stood at attention, unsure whether to speak, move, or simply watch. Young pilots whispered to one another, astonishment evident in their expressions. "He's doing it like he's never left," one murmured. Another nodded, unable to articulate the disbelief they all felt. Even seasoned technicians shook their heads quietly, marveling at the ease with which Eli executed pre-flight checks. There was a magnetic authority about him that commanded respect without a word. Eli's mind ran through the checklist almost automatically, a ritual perfected over years. Fuel levels, hydraulics, navigation systems, communication checks, every element had a contingency plan, every switch a purpose. His hands moved deftly, fingers brushing over panels as though reading Braille, understanding the aircraft not just by sight but by instinct. He spoke calmly into the radio, issuing precise instructions to the ground crew. "Clear the runway. Hydraulic lines secure. Flaps at 3 degrees. Check throttle response. Stand by for takeoff." The A-10's engines roared to life under Eli's command, a sound that vibrated through the hangar and into the hearts of everyone present. The vibrations were more than mechanical. They carried the weight of history, of skill, and of the extraordinary. Crew members instinctively stepped back, feeling both the power of the aircraft and the authority of the man controlling it. Harlow's pulse quickened, a mixture of anxiety and admiration flooding his senses. He realized that this was no ordinary emergency, no routine flight. This was a moment that would be remembered for its audacity, skill, and the quiet heroism of a man previously unnoticed. Eli taxied the aircraft toward the runway with deliberate precision. Each turn, each adjustment was made with perfect timing. The mechanics of motion, the physics of thrust and lift, the responses of the control surfaces, all flowed through him as if the plane were an extension of his own body. Young pilots followed his movements, wide-eyed, some even stepping closer to see the subtleties of his handling. He moved as if instinctively aware of every microsecond, every potential hazard, every subtle nuance that could mean the difference between disaster and success. As he approached the end of the runway, Eli executed a series of checks with seamless efficiency. Flaps adjusted, stabilizers monitored, engine performance optimal. The tension in the hangar was almost palpable. Harlow, usually composed, found himself gripping the edge of the railing. For a man who had faced crises in war zones, this moment carried a different weight. The lives at stake were not abstract. They were tangible, immediate, and dependent on the skill of a single, unlikely individual. Finally, with a calm exhalation, Eli advanced the throttle. The engine screamed, power surging through the aircraft as it began its takeoff roll. The A-10 responded effortlessly, lifting into the sky with a grace that belied its formidable size. Harlow and the ground crew watched, breathless, as the Janitor turned pilot ascended smoothly into the morning sky. This was a man who had mastered the extraordinary, whose calm authority now guided the emergency response with unparalleled skill. Once airborne, Eli positioned the A-10 for the emergency mission. The damaged aircraft, low on fuel and with compromised hydraulics, was approaching rapidly. Eli's experience became evident in every maneuver. He adjusted altitude, velocity, and trajectory with precision, stabilizing the situation before it could spiral out of control. His voice on the radio was calm, precise, and reassuring. "Maintain heading 280, flaps at 5 degrees, hydraulic pressure stable. I've got you." Harlow, observing from above, could hardly believe what he was witnessing. The Janitor, a man invisible to most on base just weeks ago, was now controlling the most dangerous and delicate aspects of an emergency operation with the skill of a veteran instructor. Every move was calculated, deliberate, and executed flawlessly. Crew members and pilots exchanged awed glances, whispering incredulously about the impossible display unfolding before them. Eli's focus never wavered. His mind anticipated every variable: wind changes, engine response, potential obstructions, and the damaged aircraft's behavior. He coordinated with the ground crew, issuing precise instructions to ensure the runway and support teams were ready for the critical landing. The calm authority he exuded seemed almost contagious, stabilizing the nerves of those around him. The hangar, once filled with panic and chaos, now operated with the measured rhythm he set. For the first time, Harlow fully understood the depth of Eli Turner's skill. This was not simply a man who had once flown planes. This was a man who had lived in the skies, whose instincts were honed under pressure, and whose composure in life-threatening scenarios was unmatched. And yet, despite the life-or-death stakes, Eli remained humble, focused solely on the task at hand, unflustered by the enormity of the moment. As the minutes stretched, Eli's maneuvers became increasingly complex. He positioned himself near the damaged aircraft, stabilizing it for the final approach. Every adjustment of throttle, every minor alteration in trajectory, demonstrated his mastery of the A-10's capabilities. The hangar below held its collective breath, witnessing a performance that seemed almost impossible. A man who had once been invisible, now saving lives with skill, calm, and quiet determination. By the time Eli aligned the A-10 perfectly for the landing approach, the emergency had begun to shift in their favor. The damaged aircraft, guided by his precise instructions, was now within controlled parameters. Harlow exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief, awe, and admiration flooding through him. The Janitor had become the pivot upon which this emergency now rested. The story of Eli Turner, previously unnoticed, was now unfolding in real time for all to witness. He had transformed from a quiet observer into the central figure in a life-or-death operation, demonstrating skill, courage, and composure that defied expectation. The hangar, the control tower, and the air above the base were all silent witnesses to an extraordinary moment, one that would not be forgotten. Harlow realized that the joke he had made, the casual remark about the Janitor flying the A-10, was now terrifyingly literal. Yet unlike a jest, this was reality. And the reality was that Eli Turner, the unassuming man who had lived in quiet obscurity for years, had become the most important figure in a mission that could have ended in disaster. The stage was set for the next phase, the landing, the culmination of Eli's expertise and the final proof of his extraordinary abilities. But for now, the hangar, the base, and the Admiral himself could only watch, holding their collective breath as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. The sky above Davis, Munson Air Force Base, was a canvas of shifting clouds, streaked with sunlight that glinted off the A-10's metallic frame. Eli Turner, seated in the cockpit, felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle across his shoulders like an old, invisible friend. His eyes scanned the horizon, tracking the damaged aircraft struggling to maintain altitude. Every instrument in the cockpit was a pulse point in a living network of machinery, and Eli was the conductor, orchestrating stability out of potential disaster. "Hydraulics are fluctuating," the voice of the distressed pilot came over the radio, edged with fear. "Landing gear stuck, fuel critical, I don't know if I can make it." Eli's expression remained calm, a mask of control honed through years of experience. "Listen to me carefully," he said, voice measured, authoritative. "Throttle at 70%. Angle of attack 22 degrees. Use rudder gently, don't overcorrect. I've got you. Follow my lead." Harlow, watching from the control tower, felt his pulse accelerate. He had seen emergencies before, but nothing prepared him for the precision and confidence Eli exuded. Crew members below were silent, leaning toward radios and screens, mesmerized by the calm authority radiating from the unassuming man. This was not a demonstration, it was life or death. The damaged aircraft began to respond to Eli's instructions. Its wobble decreased slightly, the erratic oscillations of its flight path beginning to stabilize. Eli adjusted his own A-10 to provide a buffer, positioning himself strategically to account for wind currents, turbulence, and the damaged plane's limitations. Every calculation happened instinctively, almost before conscious thought could process it. "Hydraulic pressure stabilizing," Eli noted over the radio. "Maintain attitude. I'll guide you through the approach." His voice was steady, unwavering, a lifeline of calm amidst chaos. The young pilot, gripping the controls, nodded, eyes wide with a mix of fear and trust. For the first time since the emergency began, there was a glimmer of hope. Harlow felt a strange mixture of awe and disbelief. The janitor he had once casually joked about flying was now executing maneuvers with the precision of a seasoned instructor. Every adjustment of throttle, every subtle tilt of the wings, every minor correction in trajectory was perfectly timed, perfectly calculated. Eli's skill was no longer hidden. It was undeniable, awe-inspiring, and terrifyingly effective. As the aircraft approached the base, Eli's mind raced through contingencies. There was no room for error. He monitored altitude, wind speed, fuel levels, and the damaged plane's unstable hydraulics. He anticipated turbulence, accounted for the erratic behavior of the landing gear, and issued instructions with calm clarity. Flaps at 10 degrees. Rudder steady. Maintain 300 feet. I've got you on glide path. The damaged aircraft wobbled dangerously, but Eli was ready. He guided it through a series of micro-adjustments, each one imperceptible to an untrained eye but critical for maintaining stability. The A-10's engines roared in synchrony, responding to the precise input from a man who knew every nuance of the machine. Harlow and the crew below held their collective breath, realizing that what they were witnessing was nothing short of extraordinary. Minutes felt like hours as Eli guided the aircraft closer to the runway. Each second was a test of nerves, precision, and trust. The young pilot followed every instruction, his fear gradually replaced by confidence in Eli's mastery. Crew members coordinated on the ground, clearing the runway, adjusting equipment, and preparing for the emergency landing with unprecedented efficiency. "Approach stabilized," Eli announced, his voice calm but firm. "Maintain current speed. Don't make sudden movements. Trust the aircraft and me." His hands moved instinctively over the controls, adjusting pitch, yaw, and roll with seamless precision. The damaged aircraft, once erratic and unsteady, now mirrored his guidance, tracking a controlled glide path toward the runway. Harlow felt a shiver of disbelief and admiration. The man before him, once a janitor invisible to most, had become the linchpin of an operation that would have failed without him. He was not just skilled, he was extraordinary, and yet there was humility in every movement, a quiet dignity that made the performance all the more remarkable. Eli's eyes flicked to the horizon, anticipating the final approach. "Gear alignment," he called over the radio. "Slow descent. Flaps 20 degrees. Touchdown in 300 meters. I've got control, trust me." The young pilot's grip on the controls loosened slightly, a sign of trust earned through calm guidance. The A-10 responded perfectly, gliding with fluid motion, each adjustment timed to perfection. Eli's instincts, honed through years of Air National Guard experience, guided the aircraft as though it were an extension of his own body. Crew members on the ground watched, some wiping sweat from their brows, others holding their breath. It was a masterclass in emergency aviation, performed by a man they had all underestimated. As the runway approached, Eli's voice remained calm and authoritative. "Final approach. Maintain throttle, correct for wind shear, flare gently, hold steady." His hands moved with precision, controlling speed, angle, and alignment. The damaged aircraft followed his lead, its wobbles and instability disappearing under his expert guidance. Harlow's jaw tightened. He realized the magnitude of what he was witnessing. The janitor, this unassuming man who had spent years cleaning floors and avoiding attention, was now performing maneuvers that would have challenged even the most experienced pilots. Every move, every command, every adjustment demonstrated a level of skill and mastery that defied expectation. Finally, the damaged aircraft touched down, landing smoothly with only minor bumps, its instability tamed by Eli's guidance. The hangar erupted in cheers, technicians and pilots alike rushing to acknowledge the extraordinary feat. Harlow stood in stunned silence, unable to tear his eyes from Eli, who remained calm, hands still on the controls, eyes scanning instruments even after the crisis had ended. The young pilot, shaking but grateful, climbed out of the aircraft and ran toward Eli. "Thank you, "I don't know how to," he began. But Eli simply nodded, quiet and modest, the heroism unspoken but undeniable. Harlow descended from the control tower, walking toward Eli with a mixture of awe, relief, and admiration. You just saved lives," he said, voice low, almost reverent. "I don't even know what to say." Eli looked up, a faint smile playing across his lips. "Just doing what I know, sir. The aircraft, the training, it all comes back when you need it most." His voice was calm, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his demeanor. The hangar, once filled with panic and chaos, now buzzed with a different energy: respect, admiration, and wonder. Eli Turner, the janitor invisible to most, had proven himself extraordinary. And while the immediate crisis had been resolved, Harlow knew this was only the beginning of recognizing the true extent of Eli's abilities, and the story of the man who had flown beyond expectation was far from over. The runway stretched ahead, gleaming under the morning sun as Eli Turner guided the damaged A-10 with steady hands. The wind whipped across the tarmac, gusts threatening to push the aircraft off course, but Eli's focus was unwavering. The young pilot, following his lead, mirrored every adjustment, every subtle shift in control, responding with a confidence he hadn't possessed when the crisis began. The entire base watched, silent except for the low hum of engines and the occasional static-filled radio call. "Prepare for landing," Eli said calmly over the radio, his voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "Flaps at 30 degrees, reduce throttle to 60%, keep alignment steady, watch your instruments and trust the controls. I've got you." The damaged aircraft responded, its unstable landing gear now guided by Eli's precise instructions. Each adjustment he made was calculated, correcting for variables most pilots wouldn't even notice: slight shifts in wind shear, minute fluctuations in engine power, and the subtle sway caused by the compromised hydraulics. Harlow's eyes never left the scene, his hands gripping the railing of the control tower, heart pounding in a mixture of fear and awe. On the ground, the crew prepared for any eventuality. Fire suppression teams were on standby, tow vehicles positioned to assist, and medical personnel alert and ready. Every precaution had been taken, but no one could fully anticipate how delicate this final descent would be. The runway was narrow for an A-10, and with one aircraft's landing gear compromised, the margin for error was virtually non-existent. "Adjust rudder slightly to starboard," Eli instructed, eyes scanning both his instruments and the approaching plane. "Compensate for lateral drift. Throttle steady, good." The damaged aircraft shifted obediently, its wobble decreasing as it responded to the subtle commands. Harlow exhaled slowly, though the adrenaline still coursed through his veins. He realized that this was no longer a simple emergency landing. This was a dance of skill and instinct, choreographed by a man who had once lived entirely in the skis. The young pilot, sweating and tense, followed Eli's lead. I think we're stable," he said, voice trembling with relief. "I'm okay." "Good," Eli replied softly, voice firm but encouraging. "Maintain attitude. Don't overcorrect. Trust the aircraft. I've got control." His calm authority was infectious, and the young pilot visibly relaxed, following his guidance without hesitation. As the A-10 descended further, the landing gear wobbled dangerously. Eli's eyes narrowed, hands adjusting the throttle and rudder with precise timing. "Brace for flare," he announced. "Lift slightly at 30 feet, hold now gently lower, steady. Maintain alignment, flaps 30 degrees." The aircraft responded beautifully, the slight lift absorbing the uneven landing gear's instability. Harlow and the crew below watched in awe as the damaged plane touched down, bouncing slightly but remaining under control. A collective sigh of relief swept across the base, though the tension was far from gone. One wrong movement, one miscalculation, and the aircraft could still veer off the runway. "Keep it steady," Eli instructed. "Throttle minimal, rudder neutral, let's taxi carefully." His focus never wavered, even as the aircraft slowed to a crawl. The damaged plane followed his guidance perfectly, its wobble gradually stabilizing as it rolled down the runway. Crew members cheered quietly, their relief tempered by respect for the precision required in these final moments. Suddenly, a new complication arose. The aircraft's left main wheel locked up, creating sparks and causing a violent jolt. Alarms blared inside the cockpit. Harlow's stomach sank. This was the moment he had feared, the final challenge that could undo all of Eli's careful work. "Listen to me carefully," Eli said over the radio, calm and controlled. "Use differential braking, adjust rudder for imbalance, throttle slightly for momentum. We're not done yet, but we can make it." The young pilot followed instructions precisely, though fear was evident in his trembling hands. Eli's voice guided him like a tether, steady and unwavering. Slowly, carefully, the aircraft regained stability, the sparks subsiding as the wheel aligned enough for safe taxiing. The crew on the ground monitored every second, ready to intervene but trusting in Eli's mastery. Harlow felt a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had trained for emergencies like this, seen them in simulations and live exercises, but nothing compared to this. A man previously invisible, a janitor, was now executing maneuvers with skill and precision that left even seasoned personnel speechless. Every calculation, every instruction, every adjustment had been flawless. Finally, with the runway clear and the aircraft under control, Eli guided the damaged A-10 to a complete stop. The engines idled, instruments stabilized, and the young pilot exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. We made it," he said, voice trembling with awe and relief. Eli unclipped his harness, eyes scanning instruments one last time before opening the canopy. "Good work," he said simply, voice calm yet firm. He helped the young pilot disembark, offering a reassuring nod. "You did exactly as instructed. That's how it's done." The hangar erupted in cheers and applause. Crew members rushed forward, clapping Eli on the back, some with tears in their eyes. Harlow descended from the control tower, striding toward the man who had just turned an impossible situation into a success. You saved lives today," Harlow said, voice low but filled with awe. "I don't even know where to begin." Eli shrugged slightly, calm and unassuming. "Just doing what I know. The aircraft, the training, it all comes back when it's needed most." His eyes, however, held a depth of experience and quiet pride that spoke louder than words. The young pilot, still shaking, approached. "I owe you my life," he said. "I never imagined I thought I was done." Eli nodded. "You followed instructions. That's why you're here. The credit is yours as well." His humility was genuine, a stark contrast to the heroic display he had just performed. Harlow looked around the hangar at the crew, the pilots, and the grounded aircraft. "I think everyone here needs to rethink what they know about heroism," he said, voice low but firm. "Some heroes don't wear uniforms or stand on podiums. Sometimes they just quietly exist among us, waiting for the right moment." Eli remained silent, almost invisible again amidst the celebration. Yet everyone could sense the magnitude of what had occurred. A janitor, previously unnoticed, unassuming, and seemingly ordinary, had performed an extraordinary act of skill, courage, and composure. He had turned chaos into order, danger into safety, and had reminded everyone that true mastery often hides in plain sight. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the runway, Harlow realized that this event would be remembered for years, not just as a technical success, but as a story of hidden potential, quiet heroism, and the extraordinary capability of one man who refused to be defined by his title. Eli Turner, the janitor who could fly, had not only saved lives but had reshaped perceptions of courage and skill. The stage was set for recognition, reflection, and perhaps the beginning of a new chapter in Eli's life, a chapter where his abilities, long hidden, could finally be acknowledged and respected. But for now, the moment belonged to the calm, unassuming hero who had stepped forward when the world needed him most. The aftermath of the emergency spread through Davis. Monthan Air Force Base like a ripple of awe and disbelief. Crew members, pilots, and technicians were still processing what they had witnessed. Eli Turner, the quiet janitor, had performed the impossible. He had guided a critically damaged A-10 to a safe landing, saved lives, and demonstrated a level of skill, composure, and courage that left the entire base in stunned admiration. In the hangar, the atmosphere was electric. Colleagues approached Eli, clapping him on the shoulder, shaking his hand, and expressing gratitude and astonishment in a jumble of words. Some could hardly form coherent sentences, awed by the seamless mastery displayed in the cockpit. "I've never seen anything like that in my life," whispered one young pilot, still shaken from the emergency. How did you do it?" Eli accepted their praise quietly, nodding modestly. "Just doing what I was trained to do," he said softly. There was no boasting, no self-aggrandizement, only calm humility that made the impact of his actions even more profound. The young pilot he had guided through the emergency approached, eyes wide with gratitude. "I can't thank you enough," he said. "I owe my life to you." Eli shook his head slightly. "You did what I asked, and you followed instructions perfectly. That's what kept us safe." His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades mastering both skill and patience. He understood more than anyone that the success had been a combination of guidance and trust. Admiral Harlow, who had watched the entire operation from the control tower, descended to the hangar floor. His gaze met Eli, and he felt a profound respect and admiration that went beyond words. "Turner," he said, voice low but firm, "you've done something extraordinary today, not just technically but morally. You stepped forward when no one else could, and you saved lives." Eli met the Admiral's gaze evenly, calm as always. "I just did what needed to be done, sir." Harlow shook his head. "No, you did far more than that. You've reminded all of us that heroism isn't about rank, titles, or recognition. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who quietly exist among us, unnoticed until the moment the world demands their courage." His words drew the attention of everyone in the hangar. People turned to look at Eli with newfound admiration. For the first time, the base saw Eli not as a janitor, but as a man of exceptional skill and character. His years of service, his past as an Air National Guard pilot, and his calm precision under pressure were now known to all. Yet Eli remained humble, almost invisible in the celebration, focused instead on ensuring that the aircraft was secured and the crew accounted for. The media soon arrived, drawn by reports of the extraordinary emergency. Photographs were taken, interviews conducted, and footage captured for news broadcasts. Eli, ever composed, answered questions with brevity and humility. "I was trained for this," he said. "I only did what needed to be done." His calm demeanor contrasted with the excitement and awe around him, emphasizing the quiet heroism that had always defined him. Admiral Harlow addressed the gathered personnel. "Today, we witnessed something remarkable. Eli Turner has demonstrated what it truly means to serve with skill, courage, and integrity. His actions remind us that titles do not define capability, and that extraordinary talent can often be found in the most unexpected places." His words were met with applause, cheers, and nods of agreement. As the day progressed, awards and commendations were prepared. Eli was recommended for the Air Force Commendation Medal, a recognition for valor and skill that was rare for someone not officially on active flight status. Harlow personally ensured that the recognition reflected both the technical excellence and moral courage displayed. But true to form, Eli accepted accolades quietly, focusing instead on the practical matters of ensuring the aircraft was secure and the young pilot safe. In the quiet moments following the commotion, Eli walked through the hangar, reflecting on the events of the morning. Memories of his years in the Air National Guard resurfaced. Missions flown, emergencies survived, friends lost, and the personal tragedy that had driven him into obscurity. Yet in this moment he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had returned to the skis not for recognition, but because it was necessary, and in doing so, he had reaffirmed his own sense of purpose. Harlow approached him once more, a rare smile breaking across his usually stern face. "You've done something that will be remembered here for years, Turner," he said. "Not just because you saved lives, but because you showed us all what courage looks like when it's quiet and unassuming." Eli nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "I never wanted to be remembered," he said softly. "I just wanted to do what was right when it mattered most." The base slowly returned to normal operations, but the impact of Eli's actions lingered. Pilots, crew members, and technicians spoke in hushed tones about the janitor who could fly, the man who had taken control of a critical emergency with unmatched skill and composure. His story became a quiet legend, passed from one cohort to the next, inspiring respect, admiration, and the reminder that capability often resides where least expected. Weeks later, the young pilot visited Eli again, bringing a small token of gratitude, a plaque engraved with the words, "For courage, skill, and quiet heroism." Eli accepted it without fanfare, placing it carefully on a shelf among his cleaning supplies. It was a reminder not for others, but for himself, of the day he had stepped back into the skis and made a difference. Even months later, when new personnel arrived at Davis, Monthan, they heard whispers about the man who had flown an A-10 as a janitor, saved lives, and returned the aircraft to safety against impossible odds. For Eli, the accolades were secondary. What mattered was knowing that he had fulfilled a responsibility, honored a skill, and protected lives without hesitation. Admiral Harlow, reflecting on the events, realized that the joke he had made weeks earlier, telling the janitor to fly the A-10, had transformed into one of the most extraordinary events of his career. The lesson was clear: never underestimate quiet capability, never dismiss experience, and never ignore courage that resides in unexpected places. Eli Turner had embodied all of these, teaching a lesson that would echo through the base for years to come. As the sun set over the base, casting golden light over the A-10s and the hangar, Eli quietly returned to his routine. He polished floors, checked supplies, and moved with the same calm efficiency he always had. Yet beneath his quiet exterior, a sense of fulfillment warmed him. He had returned to the skis when it mattered most, proven his mastery, and reminded the world that heroism often lives in the most unassuming forms. The story of Eli Turner, the janitor who could fly, became a quiet legend, a tale of courage, skill, and humility. It was a story not just of aviation, but of the extraordinary potential hidden within ordinary lives. And for those who witnessed it firsthand, the lesson was undeniable. Sometimes, the most remarkable heroes are the ones you least expect, waiting patiently for the moment when the world truly needs them. Eli Turner, humble and unassuming, smiled quietly to himself, knowing that he had done what he had set out to do: step forward when it mattered most, master the impossible, and leave a legacy of skill and courage that would not be forgotten. And in the calm of the hangar, as the A-10s rested and the sun dipped below the horizon, the world could only watch in awe, having witnessed a man who had turned an improbable moment into history.